Welcome and thank you for joining ISO Board of Governors meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx participant panels. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you may contact the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Roger Collington.
Thank you. Let me go ahead before I turn it over to our chair. Let's take roll. Chair Galitzeva.
Present.
Vice Chair Bagwat.
Present.
Governor Bornstein.
Present.
Governor Olson.
Present.
And Governor Leslie. I don't know if you can hear me now. I think I saw your lips move as present, but I did not hear you. So we do have a quorum, and we will continue to work out our technical difficulties. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chair Galitzeva, for the agenda.
Thank you, Roger, and welcome, everyone. Before we get started, is there any public comment on items not related to the agenda today? Do we have public comment?
And that I should have said, for the public comment, Chair Galitzeva, we did get a public comment letter from the EIM entities for general public comment, and that has been provided to the board.
Yes, we do have it. Is there anyone who wants to make a statement with respect to that letter?
Operator, if you could queue up public comment.
If you would like to make a comment, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. Once again, pressing #2 will allow you to make a comment. Please then state your name and affiliation. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. This is Sergio Dueñas from the California Energy Storage Alliance, CISA. In this period of public comment, would like to thank, first of all, Governor Olson for his dedicated work at the ISO, his collaboration with CISA, very specifically with our executive director, Alex Morris, and of course, wish Governor Galitzeva the best of luck in her new role. We'll continue to closely engage with the ISO in upcoming initiatives and the board, and we'd like to thank and recognize the ISO staff and the board as a whole for their continued consideration of the industry perspective and their engagement throughout all the stakeholder processes they participate in. We also have other comments on items related to the agenda, which we'll hold for those sections. But thanks for giving us this opportunity and for considering our input.
Of course. Thank you very much. Any other speakers?
Thank you. We do have one more. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is now unmuted.
Yes, hi. My name is David Rubin. I am the Federal Energy Policy Director for NV Energy. On behalf of a diverse group of 19 current and future EIM entities, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity for these brief comments. First, we would also like to thank David Olson for his service to the California ISO and his advocacy on behalf of the EIM, and we wish him all the best on his future endeavors. Second, as Roger indicated, we've provided a letter to the board indicating our strong support for the continued expansion of the EIM and the ongoing EDAM stakeholder process. 2020 has been a challenging year in so many different ways, and we were pleased to see the initial round of comments on the EDAM straw proposal move forward, and we welcome the opportunity to work with the California ISO staff and stakeholders to address these challenging issues. As indicated in our letter, the events of this past summer have highlighted the importance of the resource efficiency evaluation in both the EIM and EDAM. Reliable physical supply and the principle of no leaning are foundational to both the EIM and EDAM designs. Much work remains to be done, but continued collaboration is essential to achieving the regional decarbonization objectives while maintaining reliable system operations and achieving savings for our customers. And thank you again for the opportunity to make these comments and to provide the letter.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the letter as well. Any other comments?
There are no additional comments in the queue.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, CEO report. Elliot Mainzer.
Well, we missed one, and we have the general session minutes. So that's, that's item number 2. So let me ask at this point for the governors for a motion to approve the October 1st, 2020 general session minutes for the Board of Governors.
So moved.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
I'll second.
By Governor Borenstein. And considering we are on the phone, I am going to go ahead and just walk through the roll and obtain your vote on all the initiatives today. So, Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Governor Bagua?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Olson?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Mary Leslie, if you are on the line, please press pound 2. Once again, Mary Leslie, please press pound 2.
I can see you on the WebEx, so you can just raise your hand if you vote aye. We'll just leave that.
4-0.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have our quorum, and it is passed, so we'll continue to work on that technical issue. Back to you, Chair Galitova.
Okay, and now for the CEO report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Galitova, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm going to just quickly provide a few highlights from my memo dated November 11th on the CEO report. First of all, I think we're all acutely aware of the coronavirus situation really across the country, particularly acute here in California. The ISO in general has been able to maintain very satisfactory business continuity, staff, and all of our partners doing a great job keeping things moving forward. But we are continuing to be in a heightened state of awareness. As a matter of fact, we are now, over the course of the next few days, going to transition back to a state that we were in back in March, where we're going to just make sure that only our most mission-critical folks are working here in the building. We will not be having any visitors here at Folsom. We believe that this is absolutely necessary at this particular juncture, just given the rising cases. So it's disappointing for all of us to have to continue hunkering down, but I think it's the right thing to be doing for the health and safety of our employees and our partners. So just a quick update on the coronavirus. Last board meeting, we were, of course, reporting on some significant operational issues. The last 6 weeks, of course, have been quite a bit calmer. We have been fortunate to have pretty calm operations. We did have a couple of flex alerts back on October 1st and October 15th, which we were able to work through some additional restricted maintenance and some additional capacity in the real-time market. But fortunately, things have been relatively calm. Of course, probably the biggest challenge we have had is some high winds, which did prompt the California Investor Utilities to activate their PSPS programs on several occasions. Fortunately, there were no reliability impacts to the bulk electrical system. Folks did a good job managing through that. But the same can be said of our RC operations. As we know, the fires really have been widespread across the western United States here this last few months, and there were a number of outages across the region, but again, no significant impacts to the reliable operation of the bulk electrical system. So fantastic work by everybody to try to maintain reliability through some very, very, very tough operating conditions. With respect to the root cause analysis and resource adequacy enhancements, this really, in many ways, is absolutely the central focus here for us at the ISO, and I know for our partners at the Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission as well. We are going to be completing the final analysis by the end of the year, December 31st, our target, no later. And there is quite a bit of work ongoing both within the ISO and kind of between us and the CEC and the CPUC to coordinate our actions. We have a lot of work to do for 2021 readiness. At the ISO, we will be continuing to work with the scheduling coordinators of the load-serving entities to look at scheduling behavior and the issue of underscheduling that we identified in the preliminary route analysis. So there's ongoing dialogue happening there. And this Friday, we're going to be hosting a workshop. It's entitled Penalty Prices and Scheduling Priorities in the CAISO Markets, where we're going to be taking a look, exploring potential changes to the residual unit commitment process beyond the changes that we already made in September. So we're really asking the question, is there anything more we need to do to align and appropriately prioritize different types of schedules? This is very important work. We want to make sure that we're opening up that dialogue, that frontier of dialogue with our customers and stakeholders, giving them a chance to provide us with important feedback and to see if we have to open up potentially some additional tariff changes here across the balance of the winter and spring. So summer 2021 readiness is an extremely important topic for us. We're also going to be posting on November 30th a new page on our website, which will be entitled Summer 2021 Readiness, where we'll give folks a heads up on all of the activities related to the action that we're taking in advance of next summer, and make sure that everybody knows how they can get involved in those topics. I wanted to just emphasize briefly that, and this is something I really did emphasize in the memo, given the widespread concerns about the state of planning, procurement, and market operations that were articulated in the preliminary analysis, as well as the input that we've received from a wide variety of stakeholders throughout California and the West. The ISO, the CPUC, and the CEC staff are engaged in what I would characterize as very productive dialogue around the urgent necessity of making improvements to these practices and working to align agency and ISO thinking about a path forward. We're going to be discussing these issues in earnest with the Governor's Office, the Legislature, and of course our stakeholders throughout California and the West. And I think we all recognize that resource adequacy really is the foundation for reliable, efficient, and affordable electrical service, and we deeply recognize the importance and urgency of an effective paradigm, planning, procurement, and operations for the state of California. So I just want to make sure that folks know that we are laser focused on that topic. Many of you may know in recent weeks we announced, I think, a very important change in the management structure here at the ISO with our new Chief Operating Officer, Mark Rothleader. We now have brought together our market policy, planning, operations, and technology functions under Mark. The goal is to try to better align our policy and operations right from market policy all the way to dispatch. We think there's a lot of opportunity for additional integration and coordination across those functions, promoting creativity and innovation and responsiveness, and I'm quite excited about that. We also know that many of you have seen that Khaled Abdulrahman, previously our Executive Director of Power Systems and Smart Grid Technology Development, has been promoted to the Vice President of Power System and Market Technology. That's a very important job here at the ISO, and I know many of you are interested in making sure we have good continuity on that front. And also Anna McKenna, previously the Assistant General Counsel for Regulatory Issues, has been appointed as interim head of market policy and performance. So that team is, I think, very motivated, really excited about this new structure to really promote additional alignment and integration across those critical functions. I know you'll be hearing a little bit later from Therese about the Governance Review Committee. We're very encouraged to see that group really continuing to roll up its sleeves and do the hard work of trying to bring folks together around additional governance steps. And we're also continue to be very encouraged by the progress of the Western Energy Imbalance Market. I think many of you may have seen back on October 29th, we announced that the Western EIM set a second record in 2020 with $119.32 million in quarterly economic benefits. This year's third quarter results marks the highest level of gross benefits achieved for the Western EIM since the market launch in 2014 and raises the cumulative benefits to $1.1 billion. We've got a lot of work here coming in the winter and the spring. We've started market simulation for 5 additional EIM implementations next spring, including Public Service of New Mexico, Northwestern Energy, Turlock Irrigation District, LADWP, and Bank Phase 2. And we really appreciate the comments of Ms. Rubin previously, really appreciate the partnership. The EIM, I think, has just been so transformational in the West, and we really value the partnership with our existing participants and those who are going to be joining here in the next couple of years. We look forward to continuing that dialogue and opportunities for additional collaboration. Finally, I just wanted to thank many of you in my first 6 weeks here at the ISO. I've really appreciated the welcome. I've had a chance to connect with many of you. It's just many opportunities to engage, a wide variety of partners. I just really appreciate the help up the learning curve. So many people out there doing such tremendous work to help with this transition to clean resources, and I couldn't be more appreciative. And I also wanted just to thank the board and my staff here who've just been so welcoming to me as I've brought myself down here to Folsom, and really appreciate it. So that concludes my report. I now have the privilege and the pleasure of just taking a moment. I know we've already heard a few comments to this end, but I think all of you know, last week, I think it would have to be a pretty bittersweet announcement, a little bit more bitter for some of us and sweeter for others, but as we know, last week David Olson announced his retirement after 12 years, after more than 8 years, excuse me, of overseeing the historic shift to non-fossil resources here at the ISO. And I wanted to just quote briefly my quote from the press release last week, which I think captured some of my sentiments. And Dave Olson has been a pioneer in the development of the renewable energy industry. His knowledge, vision, and operating experience with highly reliable, low-carbon microgrids helped CAISO embrace the broader opportunities offered by new resources. His life's work in the fields of clean energy and corporate sustainability initiatives is reflected in thousands of megawatts of clean energy projects and progressive policies adopted across the country. All of us at the ISO thank him for his service and wish him the very best. You know, one of the things that the pandemic has taken from us a little bit is some of our rites of passage. And it's never really, it's always tough to celebrate a person who's been such a fabulous inspiration and mentor and colleague and trusted friend for so many of us, you know, with a virtual kind of celebration. But I do also have the privilege here today of offering the following resolution on behalf of the Board of Governors and the management team here for Dave, and I'd like to take a moment to read this, if I could. It's a wonderful statement for a wonderful person. Dated Board of Governors resolution for David Olson, dated November 18th, 2020. Whereas David Olson was appointed to the Board of Governors of the California Independent System Operator Corporation in April 2012 and provided guidance, strategic insight, leadership, and wisdom to the board and management team. And whereas Mr. Olson has devoted his energy career, spanning over several decades, as a leader in renewable energy policy and practices and sustainability practices. And whereas Mr. Olson, amongst his numerous accomplishments, is the former president and CEO of Patagonia Incorporated, a pioneer of sustainability practices in commerce. Previously, he led the development of wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal power projects in more than 20 countries as president of Clipper Wind Power Development, president of Peak Power Corporation, president and CEO of Northern Power Systems, and vice president of Magma Power Company. In 2000, Mr. Olson led the creation of the California Climate Action Registry, the first state registry of greenhouse gases. From 2003 through 2013, Mr. Olson served as managing director of Western Grid Group, an organization of former Western state energy officials advocating for the modernization and transition to a clean energy economy and creation of an energy imbalance market in the Western United States. And whereas Mr. Olson's leadership and guidance as a member and chair of the ISO Board of Governors and his service on the Board Audit Committee significantly shaped and developed the ISO, including the successful development and growth of the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the successful transition of the ISO to serve as the reliability coordinator for the majority of the Western interconnection. And whereas Mr. Olson called upon his many years of experience, insight, keen intellect, and passion for sustainability to help shape and support the ISO through rapid industry transformation. And whereas Mr. Olson was instrumental in guiding the ISO through a significant organizational transition with the hiring of a new chief executive officer in 2020, and whereas Mr. Olson has proven to be a valued and collegial member of the board whose thoughtfulness, insight, keen intellect, and personal charisma have been greatly appreciated and will be missed by his fellow board members, management, and staff at the California ISO. Be it resolved that the California ISO Board of Governors hereby expresses its utmost appreciation and sincerest gratitude to Mr. Olson for his dedicated years of service to the ISO, its stakeholders, and the consumers of California. Signed, Angelina Galiva, Severin Bornstein, Ash Bhagwat, and Mary Leslie.
And Governors, may I have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Angelina was moved first, and second?
Second, Severin.
It's Severin.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to the governors, who I'm sure would love to offer some thoughts, I wanted to just briefly mention that in addition to this wonderful resolution that really, I think, just captures the, the great achievements of a wonderful person, we also have a framed version of the resolution. Also, this picture, which I'm glad you're able to see, Dave, it says, to David Olson, in appreciation for your dedicated service to the California Independent System Operator Governing Board and your tireless efforts on behalf of the people of California and the West, 2012 through 2020. I think it's a remarkable set of accomplishments. I know that two of your biggest fans over here, Dave, Darlene, and Stacy, have also, I think, picked out a little nice sampling of some lovely champagne and a gift certificate for you to pick up some of your wonderful favorite amenities from your French shopping store. And again, on behalf of all of us at the ISO, we could not be more honored to have had you as a leader and mentor for many years, and we're going to miss you dearly, and congratulations.
Yes, and thank you so much, Elliot. And I have to tell you, Dave, we argued about who should read the resolution, and Elliot won the lottery, so he got to be the one reading it on behalf of all of us. We hope you enjoy what we send you. It's only a temporary celebration. Once we can all get together, we should do it in person as well. But I also wanted to, just chime in and add that you are truly a titan in the energy field, and your wisdom, dedication, and commitment to the decarbonization of the grid, to demand energy resources, to reliability and resiliency, and especially to elevating the ISO to an international and global leader in the field of integrating renewables is really greatly appreciated and cherished. Your insight, your knowledge, your experience, your leadership, and your collegiality will be missed greatly. Congratulations on your retirement, and we'll be looking forward to continuing collaboration with you, because I'm sure lots of people who threaten to retire, you're going to be one of those that we're going to be seeing lots, and we'll be looking forward to working with you. So thank you again for your service and for your support and for your mentorship.
If I can add, sorry, Dave.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to add that I've only been on the board for 2 years, but it has been an amazing experience working with you, Dave. Your knowledge of the entire energy system in California is really breathtaking and has been incredibly valuable to be able to know the history and see how the parts fit together and what all of the implications of various decisions are is something I aspire to, but am far short of these days. So I'm going to very much miss your input, and I've learned a huge amount from you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pile on Severin, because we're in the middle, and then you get to clean up, Ash. I'd just like to say, Dave, I'm really impressed with the path that you put the ISO on, with the EIM and the EDAM and the regionalization. I mean, that's like turning a tanker. So we hope that we do you proud in the future, and you will be missed. And as Severin just said, we hope for the best for your future, and I hope we'll be hearing from you often.
Dave, I just want to add, in addition to your amazing leadership, I just want to thank you for your collegiality. We have been together on this board for almost 9 years, and it has been absolutely an amazing experience, and I am, your leadership, your kindness, your dedication, I am awed. Thank you.
Well, coming as I do from a long line of Norwegian bachelor farmers, this is just all incredibly embarrassing. But I so appreciate all of your support, and I'll just say very quickly in leaving, what an honor and privilege it has been to work with my fellow board members, with ISO management and such an excellent, talented, dedicated staff. I'm very, very pleased to be able to leave with a fabulous new CEO and the management changes and promotions that he's announced and talked about earlier, I think stand the organization in very good stead. One of the things I've learned is that to remain vibrant and effective, organizations need infusions of internal mobility, new perspective, new thinking, and I think we have done that now with creating the CEO, COO position and these promotions. So we're set to remain innovative and proactive, and I know that I'm leaving the organization in very, very good hands. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dave. The organization does reflect your hard work and your leadership, and we're happy to carry the torch.
Thank you very much, Chair Galiza. That concludes my segment. I appreciate it very much, and congratulations again, Dave.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the report from the EIM Governing Body Chair, John Prescott.
John Prescott, if you can please press pound 2 on your telephone keypad. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
We hear you.
Good. Good afternoon, Chair Galitova and governors. And today I'm speaking on behalf of the Western Energy Imbalance Governing Body. And at the risk of piling on, first I would like to add congratulations and thanks to Governor Olson on his announced retirement from the Board of Governors. His support of the EIM has been immensely valuable to its success. So thank you, Governor Olson. Very much appreciated, and good luck to you. As far as my report, the governing body met virtually on November 4th of 2020. In our executive session, Chair Galitova of the Board of Governors gave a report on the DMM Oversight Committee, and Dr. Eric Hildebrandt gave us a briefing on DMM activities. In our general session, Therese Hampton, Chair of the Governance Review Committee, updated the governing body about the GRC progress, and I believe Therese will give you an update right after my report today. Oregon PUC Commissioner Lisa Tawney, Chair of the Body of State Regulators, updated us on their activities, and Pam Sporborg with Portland General Electric, Chair of the Regional Issues Forum, gave us a report on current RAF topics. Then we heard from Mark Rothleader, who gave us a report on the EIM benefits to date, and you heard Elliot say just a little bit earlier that they're at standing right now $1.11 billion in gross benefits. So that's pretty awesome. We also heard presentations on 3 initiatives which required action by the governing body. And after considering the information presented by ISO staff, comments from the DMM, public comments, and discussion by the governing body voted as follows. And we have 3 things that are also on your agenda today, and I'll click through those. First, Hybrid Energy Resources Phase 2. Our decisional role is advisory. The governing body voted to advise the Board of Governors to approve this proposal. This is your agenda item 6 today. Second, pseudo ties of shared resources. Our decisional role is hybrid. The governing body voted to approve this proposal. This is your agenda item 7 today. And third, variable O&M cost review. Our decisional role is advisory, and the governing body voted to advise the Board of Governors to approve this proposal. And this is your agenda item number 8. That's the end of my report, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, John. Any questions?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question, please press pound 2 on your telephone keypad. Then please state your name and affiliation in your question or comment. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. And there are currently no questions in the queue.
Thank you very much. So, John, will you be speaking to those items, or that was just your recommendations, and we'll take them as the items come up?
Yeah, it's unless you need me, this was the vote that we took on the 3 items, and
okay.
And if you need to, you can track me down through Stacy to come back on if you need me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Okay, moving on to the next item. EIM Governance Review Committee Chair Report, Therese Hampton.
Good afternoon, Chair Galitova and Governors. I'm going to give you a process update and then kind of a high-level overview of a couple of the key issues that we're looking at for the revised draft proposal with the Governance Review Committee. Just for a process update, a reminder of where we've been, we issued a draft proposal at the end of July. We took comments through the end of August and then held a stakeholder workshop in mid-September. The Governance Review Committee really relies on these written comments and the oral comments we received in that stakeholder workshop. And similar to how we developed the first straw proposal, we've taken all of those comments and broken the Governance Review Committee down into subgroups. We broke into 3 subgroups this time. And the subgroups really work to understand the stakeholder concerns and interests and develop options for the full GRC to consider. And about midway through that process, we held a general session on October 28th where we kind of outlined the issues that we were looking at, gave an opportunity to hear from stakeholders again on some of these issues, or even as stakeholders' thoughts had evolved over time. And we did get good stakeholder feedback on that meeting on October 28th. So now we're at the point where the full GRC is together contemplating all of these and putting together the revised straw proposal, which we still target to release in mid-December. But let me give you a flavor of some of the issues that we're looking at. One of the issues is what is the scope of joint authority. In the straw proposal, we recommended a joint authority model, and we recommended kind of a bright line test, try to make it clear what's within joint authority and what's not. And we did receive stakeholder comments about that, about how do you determine what is joint authority and what's not. And we found that it is a little bit more challenging to draw a bright line, and so you could expect to see some discussion of that and some additional thoughts on that in the revised straw proposal. We also received a lot of comments from stakeholders about dispute resolution. Really, dispute resolution in almost all forms that we saw that in the straw proposal. Dispute resolution on market design under the joint authority model, dispute resolution for the decisional classification process, dispute resolution for governance. We received comments on all of those, and so we will be reflecting on that and giving some additional thought on that in the revised straw proposal. And then the last kind of major category is the role of the outside market expert and how it relates to the Department of Market Monitoring and the Market Surveillance Committee. So we received a lot of comment on that, had discussion in the stakeholder meetings, and that will be part of the revised straw proposal as well. I have to say I have been so encouraged and grateful to work with this Governance Review Committee. Everybody is a very active contributor, and we're all doing it through this virtual process, and I think we've even kind of built a sense of team through this virtual process, which I think is really terrific. They have pulled together all of these issues, and I think we are on track for a middle of December revised straw proposal and still targeting a final proposal by Q1 of 2021. At least that's what our public schedules say. I think if we kind of play out the calendar, we might bump into Q2 of 2021 for the final proposal, but that's where we're at this point, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Therese Hampton? And Therese, I have to say, from a personal point of view, the reason we're so effective and such a team is in large part due to you and your incredible leadership. You've been a terrific chair, and you make sure to include everybody, and everyone feels very, very dedicated and invested in the process. So thank you for doing such an amazing job and being so great.
Thank you.
any questions? Well, we'll be hearing about this and have plenty of opportunity to discuss. So if there are no questions, we'll move to the next item, decision on hybrid resources, phase 2 proposal. Mark Rothleader and Greg Cook.
Thank you, Chair Galitova and Board of Governors. Today, Greg Cook will be our Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy. We'll be presenting to you our proposal on phase 2 of our hybrid resources. If you recall, in July, you approved the co-located portion, or phase 1 of this. We're now coming back to you with our phase 2 to more address the hybrid model and some additional items that were extended over from the phase 1 discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to Greg Cook. You've already heard John Prescott, our Governing Body Chair Prescott's opinion from the Governing Body Advisory opinion, and then Ryan Kurlinski from our Department of Market Monitoring will provide their comments on this proposal after Greg. Greg?
Operator, do you see Greg Cook's hand raised in the queue?
Yeah, good afternoon. I just got notification I've been unmuted. I assume everybody can hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay, great. So this is a presentation of our decision on the hybrid phase 2 proposal. The hybrid resources phase 1 and phase 2 proposals are driven by strong developer interest in adding storage facilities to existing solar and other sites. At last count, we're expecting approximately 1,500 megawatts of new storage resources to be added to existing sites by the end of next year. Next slide, please, Christina. So to set the stage, recall that the hybrid resource initiative includes 2 different models for generation with different technology types at the same location. The first model, the co-located resource model, this model is described with an individual resource ID for each generator behind a single point of interconnection, and each component is modeled similar to other resources on the grid today, and we're going to do that by implementing a new aggregate capability constraint at that point of interconnection. And as you recall, this was approved by the board back in July, and we're looking at implementing that later this year. And then the second model, which will be the focus of the proposal today, is the hybrid resource model. And this one's different in that it has a single resource ID that aggregates multiple generators at that single point of interconnection. So under this model, the ISO would have visibility to only a single resource, and the advantage of that is that it allows flexibility for that hybrid resource management, which can be important for those resource operators that want to directly manage the control of the resources for, in particular, their investment tax credit status. And so we're, again, looking for the board decision today, and then this functionality would be implemented in the fall of next year. Next slide, please. So our proposal includes enhanced market rules for hybrid resources, that we also are including additional provisions to the co-located resource proposal that was approved at the last board meeting. And again, these new provisions would be implemented in the fall of next year. So the new provisions for managing the hybrid resources under the hybrid resource model is that we would have provisions that would allow for hybrid resources to provide ancillary services as well as energy, and also a new provision that would enable these hybrid resources to communicate their generation availability on a 5-minute basis in real time through some new functionality. The enhanced functionality we're putting in, and we've phrased this to responsibly integrate co-located resources. And the reason for that is we really want to ensure that there are not detrimental operational impacts from the co-located resource model. So we have looked at this, and in the current proposal, we're looking to expand the functionality of the co-located resources to also provide ancillary services starting in the fall of next year. And by doing so, we would be expanding that aggregate capability constraint to include market awards for ancillary services in addition to energy. And we're also, as requested by stakeholders, going to have a provision to allow the co-located resources to deviate from dispatch instructions under certain limited conditions in order to avoid some renewable curtailment. And then finally, the third piece of the proposal is that we're going to be requesting new data from hybrid and co-located resources to help us facilitate with our wind and solar forecasting. The ISO forecast wind and solar resources wind and solar resources are partially based on the actual output of the resource, and those forecasts do not necessarily consider when the output is dispatched below its full capability. Next slide, please. So going into a bit more detail, so on the proposal for the new dynamic limit tool for hybrid resource operators will allow them to convey their real-time operating limits. And the reason for this is the hybrid resources face some challenges because of the different mix of resources under that single resource ID. In particular, most common, we're looking at a variable energy resource combined with a storage resource. So the physical output limits are then based on the combined resource capabilities of those two resources. So what we're proposing is the implementation of a new dynamic limit tool. And this dynamic limit tool will enable the resources using the hybrid resource model to communicate their actual generation potential to the ISO. And so this will allow the resources to specify both the upper and lower operational limit for each 5-minute interval, and this would go out 3 hours into the future. Next slide, please. Next, moving on to the co-located resource model, we had several stakeholder requests for the co-located resources to be allowed to deviate from dispatch instructions as a means of reducing curtailment of the renewable resource component. So in response to that, we are proposing to allow resources under the co-located model to deviate from dispatch instructions under some limited conditions, again, to avoid renewable curtailment. And those conditions are that we would allow the storage component to produce less than its dispatch, and so it would either be charging or discharging less if the following 3 conditions are met. First, the co-located variable energy resource component must be producing above its dispatch, and by producing above its dispatch, that would be having the joint output of the resources producing above those point of interconnection limits, and also that those co-located resources may not be providing ancillary services. So if those 3 conditions are met, again, we would allow the storage resource to either charge or discharge less than it was dispatched in order to avoid curtailing the renewable resource component to keep it within the point of interconnection operating limit. And then finally, a couple more points on this. The information sharing necessary to facilitate that deviation would be the responsibility of the co-located resource operators. And finally, the energy would be settled from those resource deviations as uninstructed energy through the ISO market. Next slide, please. The proposal also includes new provisions for collecting data from wind and solar components, again, for the ISO's forecasting needs. So what we're proposing is to require high sustainable limit data from wind and solar components that are either under the co-located model or part of the untitled resource model. So this will provide us real-time telemetry data on the maximum expected output of those components. And then again, we will use this information to forecast the potential output of the wind and solar hybrid resource components. And as a result of this, the ISO will have better visibility into the capability of these resources throughout the operating day. Next slide, please. So stakeholders largely support management's hybrid phase 2 proposal. I think in particular, the stakeholders are appreciative and recognize that the proposal provides new tools for managing hybrid resources. They're also appreciative that we're having quick delivery of this new functionality to accommodate these resources that are coming online both this year as well as next year. And also we received some good feedback from stakeholders that was really useful in helping us develop the dynamic limit tool, and by doing so, we were able to avoid otherwise having to use outage cards, which was viewed particularly onerous by several of our stakeholders. Some stakeholders, though, did raise some concerns about the resource adequacy provisions for hybrid resources. in particular, how we had proposed to apply the resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism. If you recall, that mechanism is essentially an incentive mechanism that provides either incentive payments to resources or potential charges to resources depending on their availability compared to the average availability of the resource adequacy fleet. And so what we're proposing in this proposal is to exempt resources under the hybrid resource model from this availability incentive mechanism. And we propose that for a few reasons. First, it avoids some complex settlement development that we would have to do in order to separate out the availability of the storage component versus the variable energy resource component. The reason why that's necessary is because the renewable component under the hybrid resource model should be exempt from that availability incentive mechanism because their output is already discounted through the counting methodology utilized by the CPUC, which essentially already takes into account the variable nature of those resources. So by applying that incentive mechanism to them, we would have the potential for potentially double penalizing when that renewable resource component. Also, the other reason that we looked at this was that we're looking at modifying that incentive mechanism as part of our resource adequacy enhancements. So this provision would only be in place for approximately a year until those new provisions would take over. So again, we did not feel like it was then prudent to incur all of that additional complexity that it would require to apply that resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism to those resources in this interim period. And then finally, we were concerned that there would be concerns that we're treating the hybrid resource model differently from the co-located resource model. Under the proposal that was approved at the last board meeting for the co-located resource model, the renewable component is exempt from RAIN from that resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism under our current rules, while the storage component would be under that incentive mechanism. But we felt that it was important to maintain that functionality and have it differently applied to the hybrid resources because of the fact that, again, we want to make sure we're having a lot of storage resources added to the grid. If we were to exempt the co-located storage resources, there would be an argument that we would need to exempt all storage resources from that availability incentive mechanism. And furthermore, we'd really expect that these storage resources to have a very high availability in our market. So, viewing this as only a penalty, I think is incorrect. I think in actuality, we would expect that more often than not, many of these storage components would be receiving bonus payments because their availability would be in excess of that of the average RA fleet. So for those reasons, we're proposing to exempt those resources under the hybrid resource model from the resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism until they can be replaced under the new provisions under the resource adequacy enhancement. And then finally, we have some stakeholders who are continuing to advocate for additional functionality for operating the co-located resources. We considered that. Again, we're trying to take a managed approach to this and start out fairly conservatively. We think that the provisions that we're allowing for the deviations to avoid the renewable curtailment are a good start. We'll be considering additional functionality in a new hybrid evolution initiative that's on our roadmap for next year. Next slide, please. So with that, we're requesting that the board approve the hybrid resources phase 2 proposal. It provides improved functionality to provide resources at the same point of interconnection, to also provide ancillary services. It also will improve the ISO's forecasting with a telemetered estimate of the generating capabilities of the wind and solar components of resources under both the hybrid and the co-located resource models. And finally, the policy introduces some new tools that will help the hybrid resources operate in the market and ensure that they receive feasible dispatch instructions. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Any questions for Greg from the board?
Greg, can we go back to slide 13?
Sure.
So on this idea that one of the conditions for the storage component being able to deviate from dispatch is that it not be providing ancillary services. Why is that a condition?
Yeah, so that was a condition that we put in place. Again, it is really an operational condition where, you know, in particular, if these resources were awarded regulation, that if they were dispatching themselves in a way where we were no longer had certainty on the state of charge of the resource, we would not have the certainty that they would be able to meet their ancillary service awards. So for that reason, we thought, you know, these conditions for allowing those deviations from dispatch need to be included, for prohibiting that they were not awarded ancillary services. You know, this is something we can continue to look at in the future, but again, you know, trying to make sure that we have a managed integration of these resources into the market. You know, we want to be very careful about when we're allowing resources to actually deviate from dispatch instructions. And so we thought this was a, you know, reasonable starting point and address those operational concerns.
I get that, and I understand why we're being cautious, and I'm always supportive of cautious unreliability. But it seems to me there's a risk that this actually has potentially the perverse effect of disincentivizing these resources from bidding for ancillary services, if the ability to adjust their dispatch is important enough to them. So I just urge us to keep an open mind on this, because it seems to me that there's a trade-off here, and it is not intuitively obvious to me what the better trade-off is.
This is Mark. I think we can remain open to it, and I think once we have these resources in place and they're operating under the provisions under the proposal, we'll have a better idea and evaluate if going forward that is something we could allow for.
That is all I ask. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
This is Severin. I just wanted to, well, I guess it's a question to Greg, but I have a feeling we're going to get some comments, and it's a question to the commenters. When we've talked about this, and as you mentioned, the one motivation for the hybrid resource model is being able to manage charging from the co-located renewables in order to qualify for the ITC. And I was wondering, is that the primary reason that there's interest in the hybrid resource model? Are there any other explanations for it, and what they might be? And I'm happy if you say, if you don't have an answer, but I would like, if there are others who are going to comment, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I would say that from what we've heard through the stakeholder process, the managing the investment tax credit is the primary reason. I do believe there are also some other operators out there that believe that they would rather have, they can do a better job of managing the coordination of those resources themselves as opposed to allowing the ISO market to do it.
Okay, thanks.
But again, the primary reason would be the investment tax credit by far, I would say.
Great. Any other questions?
Well, just a quick question, Greg. The timing, right? Fall of next year. Remind me again why are we waiting for the fall of next year? The hybrid model.
Yeah, because we're going to have to develop these new tools, which will take some time and testing to get those in place. And so we have our primary new functionality releases in the fall of each year. So, you know, we would have this one staged up and scheduled to go next fall. It'll be the quickest we get this implemented.
We're focusing this year to implement the co-located functionality because we are going to start getting some of these resources coming in this year. And that was the primary focus between now and at least the summer for the hybrid resources, and then this functionality will be scheduled for the fall of next year.
Got it. So the co-located in July and the hybrid in the fall.
Well, actually, the co-locate will be even earlier in July. It'll be, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but it'll be before the end of this year.
Yeah, I believe it's next month when we're planning on getting that implemented.
Good. Excellent. Any other questions? Okay, and as Mark pointed out, the IAM governing body had an advisory role on this item, and they advised us to approve. So moving on to the Department of Market Monitoring comments, Ryan Kurlinski.
Yes, hi, this is Ryan Kurlinski from the Department of Market Monitoring. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, excellent. First, on behalf of DMM, I want to express quickly to Governor Olson what an honor it has been to work with you on the ongoing transition of the grid. Thank you for your leadership, and we wish you good luck on your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Chair Golitova, thank you. Chair Golitova and Board of Governors, thank you for the opportunity to provide DMM's views on this hybrid resources initiative today. The ISO's hybrid model proposal, that is, its proposal for taking a unit that has combined storage and generation technologies and modeling it as a single resource. This hybrid model proposal seems reasonable to us as a first attempt to get something in place quickly to help incorporate the new combined storage and generation technologies that are coming online. We think when there are significant interactions between the two components of a combined storage generation unit, it makes sense to have a hybrid model, so we support the ISO developing this option. The proposal does have some issues that the ISO has acknowledged, but we think they can be addressed as enhancements in their hybrid evolution initiative next year. The first issue, I think the ISO is going to implement this initial design with units that choose the hybrid model being exempt from market power mitigation. So we appreciate the ISO committing to developing mitigation in their hybrid evolution initiative next year. The second issue is that the ISO is proposing to let hybrid model units declare their own dynamic limits. As the ISO discussed during the stakeholder process, these limits could potentially be automated by the ISO, and so we do encourage the ISO to work on developing that enhancement in their evolution initiative. And that's because in the absence of automating the dynamic limits, a hybrid model unit, it could have the ability to withhold charging or supply capacity from the grid. So we think a critical aspect of the ISO's proposal is that they are requiring every hybrid modeled unit to provide data that will allow the ISO and DMM to monitor that these dynamic limits are being used appropriately, and so the ISO can potentially automate them. And that key data includes the variable energy resource component forecasts and storage component safe to charge. But the ISO has these data provision requirements in its proposal, so DMM supports the initial hybrid model design. Thanks again, and I would be happy to try to address any questions you may have for me.
Any questions for Ryan? Okay, hearing none, let's move over to public comments. Operator, can you open?
And Chair Golitseva, let me just interject before we open the line that we did receive 2 public comment letters that have been provided to the board, and one is a joint letter from the Large Scale Solar Association and Solar Energy Industries Association, and the other is a letter from EDF Renewables, and both of those letters, again, have been provided to the board.
Hey, Roger, this is Stacy, and we also received one from AWEA.
Thank you. That was stuck on the bottom of my pile, so I appreciate that, Stacy. Yes, we did receive 3 letters, and the third one being from the American Wind Energy Association.
Okay, great. Public comment? Do we have public comment on this item?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to make a comment, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. Once again, if you'd like to make a question or comment, please press #2, and state your name and affiliation, followed by your question or comment. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. This is Sergio Dueñas from the California Energy Storage Alliance, ESA. Would like to say that we are very thankful to the ISO staff for their development and their dialogue of this improved participation path for hybrid resources and co-located resources. The ISO has really established itself as a thought leader in the country by developing something like this ahead of many other jurisdictions. We generally support this phase of the Hybrid Resources Initiative, this proposal, and we are confident that the ISO, collaborating with all stakeholders such as CISA and others, will be able to cure any potential issues or deficiencies that are within the current proposal. To name a few of the items that we think might require further refinement in upcoming initiatives, first, the alignment between the Hybrid Resource Initiative and how hybrid resources will develop, use the dynamic limit tool and develop their own limits. How does that integrate with, for example, the move of the ISO to an enforced capacity or UCAP framework in the resource adequacy program? As I'm sure the board is aware, there are several load-serving entities that are looking into hybrid resources as a means to continue to provide reliable power even as the grid continues to decarbonize. In order to support these efforts, there must be clarity as to how these resources will count, how they will be valued, and how they will work within the RA framework. We believe that this initial proposal does give the ISO a very strong foothold to continue to refine the role of hybrid resources in the ISO's markets, but work needs to continue to be done, and CISA, as we have been a very engaged stakeholder, will continue to work for this. Another important workable solution for future iterations of this proposal would be to better understand how ancillary services relate to the ability of particularly a storage asset to deviate from dispatch in a co-located arrangement. As it's been mentioned by the board before, we do not believe that this restriction right now should be held indefinitely. It should be just an operating barrier, since it could create incentives that are risky for the reliability of the grid. So in this sense, we generally support this proposal. We congratulate and thank the ISO for its engagement and leadership, and we'll continue to do our part and highlight issues and proposals to mainly advance the role of hybrid resources and storage as a whole in the ISO market. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being such an engaged stakeholder. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Susan Schneider from Phoenix Consulting, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Large Scale Solar Association and the Solar Energy Industries Association based on the letter that we sent to the board. The last time I spoke with you, it was actually on this general topic, and I can't say I'm happy to be back, but I do appreciate the ability to speak with you again on this issue. As you know, this relates to co-located resources and the ability of the storage resource to deviate in order to prevent curtailment of the renewable resource. So there are two separate resource IDs, and the conditions that were laid out by management in the phase 2 process are generally acceptable to us. However, we do not see any reason why the storage resource cannot provide ancillary services and provide the ability to deviate at least to some degree in order to prevent renewable curtailment. And you can see on page 2 of the letter the general reasons for that. Generally speaking, because these solar and storage resources will share a point of interconnection that does not allow full output from both of them at the same time, it is necessary if they're both producing at full at their scheduled level and there is available variable resource energy at that time, the storage would have to back off to allow it. And so we appreciate the ability to do that and management support for that. However, there is no reason why in doing that there could not be, if the storage resource was providing ancillary services, the headroom necessary to provide any kind of ancillary services up, regulation up, spinning reserve or non-spinning reserve, or preservation of the ability to go down if the resource is providing regulation down. So this is not any additional functionality, does not require software development, just like the original market rule change to allow the flexibility in the first place. And the ISO will have full resource visibility of the storage to be able to check and see that the storage state of charge is as necessary. In general, if the storage is backing off, of course, it would have a higher state of charge. So for all but regulation down service would actually be better able to provide that service as long as the headroom is allowed in the adjustment. So what we are asking is a fairly small change here. There's no real reason to wait for this or to see how this, this is not a scary resource. These are resource types the ISO has on its system and understands how they operate and will have full visibility. So we're simply asking that the storage resource that is be allowed to exercise the flexibility when it is providing ancillary services, as long as it does not damage, to the extent that it does not damage the ability to provide those ancillary services. And again, this does not require any change in software, and the ISO has adequate tools if the resources do damage their ability in some way to provide the ancillary services. So I think I've probably exhausted my time, but I'd be happy to take questions if you have any about this.
Thank you. Any questions or responses?
This is Severin. Would any of the staff be interested in responding to this?
Yeah, would Greg?
Yeah, Greg, maybe trying to chime back in. There is Greg, sorry.
Yeah, this is Greg. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I mean, just a couple of comments. First, I think it's important to recognize we're not prohibiting these resources from providing ancillary services. All we're saying that is they got an ancillary service award during those periods, they need to follow their dispatch instructions. So, I want to be clear on that because we think that it would be fairly limited circumstances when they would need to be doing, or they would want to do that deviation in order to avoid the potential renewable curtailment. That being said, again, it's the operational concerns that we would need to make sure that these resources are capable and in a position to meet their ancillary service awards, and that we would be able to measure compliance with that. And there's issues with that if we have these resources deviating differently from where we expected them to be from dispatch. And I agree, it's not as much of a concern for the upward services like spin, non-spin, and reg up, but it's definitely a concern for regulation down where if the resource is charged to a level where it's unable to provide or follow the AGC signal anymore that it's being given. So, those are some real operational concerns that we have, and that, at this time, at this initial implementation of this, that we think it's more prudent to have these restrictions in place now, and that's something, again, that we can consider in the future as we have gained some experience operating these resources.
May I respond to that? I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, these resources, particularly the storage co-located resources, will be just as able and well-suited to respond to provide ancillary services as standalone storage facilities. And they are, once they're certified, and if they're counted for resource adequacy, there's a must-offer obligation, so they will be required to offer bids for ancillary services. And then if they are selected to provide any award of any size, no matter how small, they will be completely prohibited from exercising the storage flexibility in those hours, really the entire hour, because that's how ancillary services are awarded in the day-ahead market. So it is quite a restriction on flexibility and could potentially basically they'll have to offer it if they're certified, but I think this will make resources think twice about becoming certified in the first place.
Okay, thank you. And we'll keep an eye on that and make sure that we fine tune it as we gain more experience and insight. Any additional comments?
And we do have one additional comment. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please state your name, then your affiliation, and your question or comment. Thank you. And caller, your line is unmuted. We're not able to hear you. Please ensure your line's not muted on your end.
Yes, hello. Thank you. My name is Evan Bierman. I am the Director of Energy Storage for EDF Renewables. We're one of the largest developer of renewables in the world and very supportive of California goals. We are bringing on one of the first co-located resources in the state. That's happening currently and should be online very shortly. Do want to thank the CAISO staff. They've been tremendously helpful in getting our resource online, and being able to have that relationship with them is really valuable to us. I'm calling in today because my ask of the board, and thank you for hearing my time, is that you extend the same treatment that's being provided to hybrid resources and you extend that to co-located resources. So I think as a point of clarification, California policy really set by the CPUC on resource adequacy capacity for hybrid resources, and I'm using hybrid resources in the general term, is to treat them the same. So that started back in February to treat the capacity value from these two different types of resources the same, extending to D2006-031, where they explicitly said the capacity should be the same between the two resources. And we're not here to have that discussion whether that's right or wrong, but we see that as the policy laid out by the CPUC in the state. Therefore, what we see is that in that decision about capacity, that in the RA program is that co-located resources are treated the same as hybrid resources, and similarly penalized by the CPUC for being a hybrid resource, the same as hybrid resources. Co-located resources are not the same as a standalone storage resource. They're not treated the same. They have all these additional rules as we're talking about today. And so we don't see any reason why to lump them together. Co-located resources face just the same difficulties as hybrid resources do in accounting and dealing with the solar and storage. We want to try to make all this as useful for the grid as possible. Everything we can do to provide stability to the grid. And so we think by not extending the same treatment under the RAIM penalty mechanism to co-located resources as hybrid resources means that they are not being treated the same and not equitable. So, for example, there's been other instances, and we emphasize with the CAISO staff, like there's a lot of changes going on, and they're doing a great job. There's a lot of changes, but for example, the CAISO is going to allow hybrid resources to provide ancillary services immediately, whereas effectively the CAISO is not going to allow co-located resources to provide ancillary services until sometime after next summer, really when ancillary services are most needed. So there's already starting to be several points of inequity between the two types. And again, these are all hybrid resources. Generally the difference between hybrids and co-locateds are, metering and things like that. And so what we feel is starting to be a pattern of preferentially treating one resource type different than the other, which would be in conflict with what we think is starting to be a policy of treating them the same, particularly under the RA program. And so what we are asking the Board of Governors to do is there needs to be no changes except to just extend the same treatment to co-located resources that's being extended to hybrid resources, which is to exempt them from RAIN. And then if there is additional consideration to potentially accelerate the implementation of the software so that co-located resources can implement ancillary services for next summer as well. Is there any questions about that?
Thank you very much. Anybody have questions? And any comments?
I share the concern about asymmetric treatment of hybrid resources, the hybrid resource model. I also have a concern about the terminology here, which I find incredibly confusing. The hybrid resource model and the co-located model. And it does seem like that whether on equity grounds or perverse incentives to adopt one or the other, I would like to, going forward, and I don't think we can in real time make these changes, make sure that we're not setting up incentives to choose one in order to be able to take advantage of certain opportunities that aren't available to the other. And I guess I'm not sure in the end exempting from RAIN is the right answer for either. So rather than going into the direction of exempting both, I wonder if they should both be under it. But I'm not saying I know that. I'm just saying that's my intuitive response at this point. But I do think we need to revisit this at some point and make sure the treatment is symmetric.
Yeah. Is it possible also?
Someone else has a strong opinion.
Is it possible for the staff to answer this question as well?
Yeah, this is Greg Cook. And, that is something we considered through the stakeholder process. Severin, I think you make a good point. Our original thought was that we would apply RAIN to both co-located and hybrid resources. And, I think particularly in the environment we're in, it's very important for us to not be exempting resources from the resource adequacy provisions of our tariff. We need to ensure that they're under those requirements and that we can count on those resources and that they have the same incentives to the extent possible to perform. So, yeah, I think if we really push to have this comparable treatment, which, as I argued in my presentation, we think under this limited circumstance, it's actually prudent to have this different treatment. It's only for a one-year period. And, the alternative, I think, is exactly where you were going, is that we would apply RAIN to the hybrid resource model as well. So that would mean any deviations they have using the new dynamic limit tool, those would be subject to RAIN. And, that was something that we looked into, but we thought, we're trying to make sure that this is a fair and equitable way in which we would initially implement this. And since, at least for the majority of these resources, the larger component is going to be the variable energy resource component, we use that as really the driver of the policy, which those resources are exempt. So we do have different rules for different resources in the market today. Those resources are exempt from the availability incentive mechanism, and since, again, those are the largest component, that we thought that should be the driver. And also, since it's only for that, short one-year period, and that this would all be subsumed with the new resource adequacy enhancement provisions that would go in a year later. So that was our rationale. And finally, I also wanted to mention, there was this argument that, we're also not treating them differently for ancillary services. I wanted to be clear that they would both be allowed to provide ancillary services at the same time starting next fall. So there won't be a period when one can provide ancillary services and the other can't.
Right, well, sorry, go ahead. So, sorry, I just lost my train of thought because of the timing thing. Go ahead. The thought will come back to me.
Okay. Any additional comments?
This is Evan. If I may respond quickly, I don't think there's anything different about hybrid resources and co-located resources. The dominant resource in a co-located resource is still solar, the same as storage. So I don't think that creates material difference. And then on the comment about ancillary services, this is supposed to be 1 year, but my resource is going to be operating starting very soon. And so the co-located resources are going to be disadvantaged versus a hybrid resource for that year until we are allowed to do ancillary services. So, as we see it, there's already been some inequities, and we're just asking to, again, extend the same treatment if that's the policy. And I empathize with the CAISO staff. This is, again, very complicated. I've done similar things to them, and I applaud them for all their hard work. But if there's any way to expedite allowing co-located resources to do ancillary services, especially before next summer, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. My brain is back in session. So my question is this. For hybrid resource, the reason for variable resources we don't apply rates is because they're already basically discounted in their DRA program because of the fact that they obviously cannot produce their nameplate capacity consistently. But once you co-locate or hybridize, or whatever word you want to use, I agree, this terminology is confusing, battery with, say, solar, why at that point do you need to discount the capacity? Because then presumably, so that you could have a consistent output, right? What am I missing?
Yeah, it's really it's the combined capability of the two resources is what their maximum output potential could be, which is, again, it depends on both the state of charge of the battery storage resource combined with the fuel availability to the variable energy resource. So whether how hard the wind's blowing or how much irradiance they're getting. So, it's the combination of those two factors. True that they could, if they were bidding, conservatively, they could try and manage a capacity rating with the battery to keep it more stable, but that would essentially be limiting potentially the amount of output that you could be getting from the hybrid resource at that point.
Yeah, I'll just add that, if the variable component is 100 megawatts and the battery is 10 megawatts, you can see that the effective load carrying capability, which is the determination of what's available for the variable component, is the larger driver, and it really drives kind of the still variable total capability of the hybrid resource in that case. Whereas in the co-located, the variable resource stands alone, the battery stands alone, and the battery has its own net qualifying capacity.
Okay, thank you.
So
thank you.
I was just going to, Angelina, I was just going to add one more thing to what Severin and Asha were just saying, is that the only concern, Mark, is if the market's moving faster, this point about competitiveness is a real issue, so that I'm wondering if we can be sensitive to, that's why I was asking about the timing earlier, why we were waiting a year to do this. If it's possible to review it earlier than that.
I appreciate that, and we'll take a look at it, but we have a lot going on in terms of trying to add new functionality, and there's this is a lot of new resources that we are just becoming familiar with ourselves, and we really do feel like we need some time to learn, and we will adapt and we will accommodate what we can from that learning. But this is we're going from about 500 megawatts to about 2,000 megawatts in about a year period. And these resources are going to be acting very differently than probably the existing resources that we have today.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. Any more comments?
There are no additional comments in the queue.
Okay, and we should note that all of these go through a very extensive stakeholder process as well, and participants have had the opportunity to be heard and their concerns addressed through this process as well.
And if I could say that, I mean, we take back all these comments very seriously, and we do have a very robust discussion from a policy perspective, from an operational perspective, and we debate it internally, and we really try to come up with a balanced approach that also is cognizant that operations and how we operate is getting much more difficult in terms of managing the system. And so we need a little bit of time to really adapt our systems and our processes to that new learning.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So, Roger, resolution?
Yes, I think we're ready for a motion. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the tariff revisions necessary to implement the proposal for hybrid resources as described in the memorandum dated November 11, 2020. And move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposed deliverability methodology revisions, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Osh moves. Second?
Second.
Mary. And again, Governors, I will go ahead and go through roll for your vote. Governor Bhagwat?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
Governor Olson?
Aye.
Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 7, decision on ties of shared resources proposal. Again, Mark Rockleader, it's your show.
Okay, thank you very much. This item, ties of shared resources, is a hybrid decision with the EIM governing body, and you've already heard from Chair Prescott on their opinion about this. Greg will be walking through this, and this is an important item for some of the upcoming EIM entity integration, so I just want to be cognizant of that. Ryan Kerlinsky will be providing an opinion from the Department of Market Monitoring. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Mark. So this is our decision on ties of shared resources. So this initiative addresses issues with entities that have a share of a resource in a non-EIM balancing authority area that serves load in the California ISO balancing authority area, and then that non-EIM balancing authority area becomes an EIM balancing authority area. And so this is particularly an issue that came to light when we were looking at integrating LADWP this spring, and they have their Intermountain Power Plant, which has some recipients of the power from that plant that are located within the California ISO's balancing authority area. Next slide, please. So we found that some new provisions are needed to accommodate those EIM entities that have a share of a resource that serves load in the ISO balancing authority area. And today, those shares of those resources and those non-EIM BAAs, they are able to serve that load through dynamic schedules. And dynamic schedules are essentially automated real-time dispatch, and they also have automated interchange schedule adjustments, and that remain part of the host balancing authority area's resource portfolio. And the problem is this can become somewhat problematic when that balancing authority area becomes an EIM balancing authority area, because it can conflict with the EIM transfers as well as the real-time interchange accounting that can have impacts on pricing and dispatch when those dynamic schedules are economically bid into the market. And this could result in inconsistencies between dispatches and bids for those dynamically scheduled resources. So we've looked into this and found that this can be solved by converting those dynamic schedules into pseudo-ties. Now, a pseudo-tie essentially logically transfers the resource from its physically located balancing authority area to the ISO balancing authority area and becomes a resource under the ISO balancing area's control, and so therefore are no longer included in the interchange accounting. And as a result, by converting to pseudo-ties, this avoids those market inefficiencies that could arise if the resources continued to be dynamically scheduled. So that being said, however, we would leave this open as an option for the resources. We know that some of them might not be ready when their balancing authority area turns into an EIM balancing authority area to move from the dynamic schedules to the pseudo-ties immediately, or some of them may still prefer to use the dynamic schedule functionality. So we're leaving it as an option to them as to which functionality they would like to use. Next slide, please. So our proposal includes two key provisions to facilitate the pseudo-tying of the shared resources to the ISO's balancing authority area. Now, today, the ISO only allows an entire resource to be connected to the ISO balancing authority area as a pseudo-tie. And this requirement is a result of previous metering rules that required generation resources to have energy meters that can be directly read by the ISO. But back in 2016, the ISO changed its metering rules to allow resource operators to calculate and submit meter readings for a share of a resource's output. So the first provision is that we will require the submission of a meter data plan that shows how the energy output readings of a shared resource would be allocated to the resource shares and then reported to the ISO. The second provision we're proposing is a shared resource allocation protocol, which essentially describes how the shared resource would be operated and also documents its operating characteristics. So this will help us to ensure that we have equitable allocation for the big cost recovery elements and identifies how compliance will be monitored and verified. And it also establishes equitable and enforceable cost allocation for the resources. And we purposefully kept some flexibility in how the resource owners can structure the allocation of their shares as long as they align with principles that we stated in the initiative. And we think in most cases these resources already operate as a shared resource and have contractual arrangements that will largely dictate the resource allocation protocol. Next slide, please. As Mark mentioned, this proposal fell under the EIM governing hybrid decisional role, which requires approval by both the EIM governing body and the ISO board. As you already heard, the EIM governing body did approve this at their meeting earlier this month. The rationale for this was the EIM governing body has the primary authority over the real-time market provisions, as the primary driver for the initiative was an issue that was specific to EIM balancing authority areas, but then the board has the primary approval authority over the day-ahead market provisions. And we also found that these two provisions were not severable, which is how we ended up with the hybrid classification for this initiative. Next slide, please. So stakeholders support the proposal. We were able to iron out the identified stakeholder concerns through the stakeholder process. We addressed some initial comments through added explanations as well as through LADWP's EIM implementation planning. Also, our response to comments on the draft final proposal, we added some details on the pricing issues that arose from the dynamic schedules, documentation of outage allocations, and also the enforcement of cost allocation. Once we put out the final proposal, we had no further comments that raised any concerns. Next slide, please. So with that, we request the board approve our proposal for pseudo-ties of shared resources. Again, this will use some of our existing systems to support entities with shares of generation in the EIM balancing authority area that serve load in the ISO's balancing authority area. And we're able to now extend the pseudo-tie mechanism to the shared resources by leveraging our more flexible metering rules that were established in previous stakeholder process, and also through the establishment of the new shared resource allocation protocol, which will provide us the information that we need to make this happen. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Greg? Okay, hearing done. We do already have the approval from the EIM governing body. As was mentioned before, John Prescott indicated that this is a hybrid decision, and the EIM governing body has voted to approve. So now, again, Brian Kurilinski, Department of Market Monitoring, comments. Thank you. Ryan, are you there?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Chair Galiva. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
All right, excellent. There we go. All right, thanks. This is Ryan Kurilinski again with the Department of Market Monitoring. DMM supports the ISO's final proposal. We appreciate the importance of the ISO working with stakeholders to develop a shared resource design that could increase participation in the Western EIM and CAISO markets. This proposal allows a lot of important flexibility for resource owners to define the details of how the resource will be split between balancing areas. Early in the process, we did point out that this flexibility could, in some extreme cases, potentially allow for some inflation or inequitable allocation of an uplift payment, good cost recovery, that gets paid to generators. This is an uplift that gets paid by the balancing area that each generator is in, so we recommended some protections. And ISO addressed these concerns effectively by making many key features of the splitting plans public and by adding the authority for the ISO to revoke or suspend the agreement if a splitting plan is causing these bid cost recovery issues. So we support the final proposal, and I'd be happy to try to address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? Thanks again, and we really appreciate the robust stakeholder process. It's an important item for the EIM market and sending a positive message throughout the West that we are ready to respond to demands and the needs of the marketplace. Opening it to public comment.
If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and affiliation, then your question or comment. And it appears we do have one in queue. Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you to the CAISO and the Board of Governors for the opportunity. My name is Bob Manasian, and I'm a Deputy City Attorney with the City of Los Angeles, specifically representing LA-DWP. While I advise on a variety of different matters for DWP, without doubt, EIM has become an increasingly high priority with our planned entrance into CAISO's EIM in April 2021. And this particular initiative is a good example of challenges both CAISO and DWP identified during DWP's process to be able to efficiently participate in EIM. Overall, LA is supportive of this initiative and is very appreciative of the substantial time, energy, and resources that was put into this by both CAISO and LA, as well as various other stakeholder utilities. Ultimately, while it appears LA may not be using this arrangement in the short term, we think it is a good step in the right direction in addressing certain challenges relating to jointly owned resources in the EIM, and we do look forward to continuing to work with CAISO on various initiatives going forward, including a future comprehensive modeling solution that will more accurately align the market model with the operation of jointly owned resources. So again, thank you for the opportunity to provide a comment. We are supportive of the initiative.
And thank you so much for your comments. We are really looking forward to LADWP joining the EIM family.
Thank you. And there are no additional comments in the queue.
Any comments from the board? Questions? Okay, hearing none, I think we're ready for a resolution.
Great.
Roger.
Yes. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the proposal for pseudo-ties of shared resources described in the memorandum dated November 11, 2020, and move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. I have a motion.
Also move.
Chair.
Second.
I'm sorry, who's second?
Mary seconded.
Thank you, Mary. Governor Bagua, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Glitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
Governor Olson?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
Great, fantastic. Moving on to our last item, item 8, decision on variable operations and maintenance cost review proposal. Surprise, surprise, Mark Loffletter again.
I'm sorry, but thank you. This is an item that resulted from our review of the cost adders and the variable maintenance cost adder approach, which happens every 3 years. And when we started this in 2018, it took a turn for looking at it from a more principled or structural basis. So this is a result of that more deeper review of how the costs come about and how we apply the cost to the default energy bid and the commitment cost. So with that, Dr. Bautista Alderete led, and his team led this initiative, and this was also brought to the EIM governing body as an advisory opinion, which Kara Prescott has already discussed with you. From the Department of Market Monitoring, Amelia Blanque will be discussing and providing an opinion from the Department of Market Monitoring perspective, and they do have a unique perspective as they are the agent for the ISO in some of the negotiations for these costs. So I think their perspective is well-founded in this. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bautista Alderete to give you the explanation of this proposal.
Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, governors. I'm bringing to this board the proposal for variable operations and maintenance cost review. The CAISO market relies on cost information to calculate resource optimal dispatches. These costs are captured through the three-part resource bids, which includes the incremental cost bids, the minimum load cost, and the startup cost bids. Resources can bid in anywhere between the bid floor and the cap, while they can bid up to 125% of the proxy cost for minimum load cost and startup cost. The market uses also default energy bids in the market power mitigation process. These resource costs have different components, such as the fuel cost component. And indeed, some of these costs are actually calculated by the CAISO. We refer to these components as cost adders. These adders are used in the default energy bids or in the caps imposed in the market for minimum load cost and startup cost bids. One of those adders is what we call the variable operations and maintenance adder. Currently, the variable operations and maintenance adders are set in the tariff with very specific default values. These values were introduced in 2012. Back then, the CAISO committed to review and update these adders as needed every 3 years. As part of the last regular review in 2018, we found a need for a more extensive assessment of the operations and maintenance cost framework. In October 2019, the ISO formalized this effort in the stakeholder that we call Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review. This is the proposal we are bringing today for your approval. Next slide, please. This initiative proposes to improve how operations and maintenance costs are estimated and accounted for in the ISO markets, and it has two main components. The first component proposes explicit principles for the use in the categorization of operations and maintenance costs. Having a well-defined set of cost principles will allow for a simpler and also less onerous negotiations between the ISO and market participants. It also provides reference categories to simplify the review of the default operations and maintenance other values. The second component provides for an updated cost framework on which the proposed principles will apply. It also updates the default values for operations and maintenance others that can be then used by market participants in lieu of explicit negotiations. This new framework estimates a default value for certain operations and maintenance costs that are currently not available, and thus may potentially eliminate the need for some participants to engage in negotiations in the first place. These two components will improve transparency and certainty, will lead to a more efficient market by having better cost framework, and also decrease administrative burden on market participants and the ISO. Next slide, please. Under the current operations and maintenance cost framework, we have two others, variable operations and maintenance other and major maintenance other. For the variable operations and maintenance others, we have a set of default values applicable by technology, and participants can also negotiate a resource-specific other if needed. Major maintenance others are derived for each resource based on a resource-specific cost negotiation with the ISO. In this negotiation process, the Department of Market Monitoring is currently acting as our agent. The ISO includes these others in the resource default energy bids and the contingent cost bid caps. The default energy bid is used in local market power mitigation, while the contingent cost caps limit what market participants can bid in for minimum load cost and startup cost. The main challenge today is that the categorization of these various costs is not well defined. Which ones are variable versus fixed cost? Which ones are minor versus major maintenance costs? Which ones should be accounted for in incremental cost versus commitment cost? The lack of a better categorization of these costs represents a challenge for the ISO by the time we have to go and update the default values and also engage in resource-specific negotiations. Therefore, the main goal of this proposal is to improve the categorization of these costs, to have better accounting of those, and be more consistent when we have to do the process of the negotiation and the update of the default values. Next slide, please. The first component of the proposal defines a set of principles in how we classify the variable maintenance cost, also how we classify the variable operations cost and the fixed cost. Variable costs are those defined directly by the production level of the resources. The key principle here is that only variable costs will be considered in any of the three resource reference levels. By principle, the variable cost can vary with the run hours of the facility, the production level of the facility, or even the frequency of startups of the facility. Variable costs can then be categorized in two groups. The first group is variable operations cost, which reflect mainly the cost of consumables like raw materials, chemicals, water. It doesn't include fuel cost, and it doesn't include maintenance cost. The second group is variable maintenance, which are costs expected to reflect future maintenance expenses and also are expected to happen within the life of the resource. Having this well-defined set of principles will provide the transparency needed to engage in negotiations and achieve a consistent outcome across resources similarly situated. This will also help the ISO to perform the triennial review of the others that we are due. Next slide, please. Using this cost framework of the first component, the second part of the proposal estimated default values for both variable operations others and maintenance others. The default values for variable operations cost were estimated in a cost study performed by a consultant, and that was under a contract with the ISO. The estimates were based on publicly available information and were guided with the CAISO cost framework that I just described. The default values for maintenance others were estimated by the ISO using publicly available data, and they were openly discussed at length during the stakeholder process using the input from the participants. These default others will be used in either of the three costs available for resources in the market. Again, either the default energy bids, the startup cost, or minimum load cost caps. The default values are estimated by technology. That means resources in the same group of technology will have the same default value. We have to recognize that given specific conditions of a resource, if the default value is not a good estimate of its cost, participants still have the option to negotiate a specific other with the ISO. Next slide. Regarding stakeholders' position about this initiative, the stakeholders are generally supportive of the final proposal. The ISO incorporated several suggestions and addressed multiple concerns through the stakeholder process. This stakeholder process took a year to complete. The main concern we heard in the policy process was that the default values for variable operations could be too low. And we addressed that concern largely by making two changes. The first change is that we proposed default values that represent variable maintenance costs in addition to the initially proposed values for variable operations. The second change was that we increased the original proposed consumable values to reflect higher water costs present in the WACS region in comparison to the East Coast reference that we used in the analysis. In the last round of the initiative, we heard from a participant that the proposed default value for variable operations specific for wind resources may be too low. We tried to address the concern and made an effort to find publicly available cost information and estimates specifically for variable operations for wind resources, but we couldn't find such specific information. So we proposed a default variable operations adder based on CAISO's best estimates at this point. We further believe that this last concern is greatly mitigated by the fact that the negotiation option is still available for scheduling coordinators. And finally, towards the end of the initiative, there was a concern that this proposal could be implemented too soon. We have addressed this concern by moving the implementation date from October 2021 to January 22. Next slide, please. To conclude, management requests the board to approve the variable operations and maintenance cost proposal. This proposal was brought to the EIM governing body under its advisory role, and it was supported. This proposal, in short, will provide for a more accurate accounting of operations and maintenance costs in the ISO markets. It will also increase market efficiency by using a well-defined set of principles. The newly proposed default operations and maintenance others were developed through a very robust and open discussion process, which provided the required transparency of how we arrived to these values. The proposal will also decrease the administrative burden on both market participants and the ISO and the Department of Market Monitoring by having available a predefined set of default values. That's what I have for this briefing. I will be glad to address any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. Any questions from the board? Okay, hearing none, we already also have the approval for the advisory opinion from the EIM governing body as expressed by John Prescott, as mentioned by Mark Letter again. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to all of us the opinion of the Department of Market Monitoring comments, and that would be Emilia Blanchi. I believe that's her first time addressing the board. So welcome, Emilia, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is Emilia Blanchi addressing the board on behalf of the Department of Market Monitoring. As Mark Rossleader mentioned, DMM's comments are based on DMM's experience reviewing reference maintenance level applications and addressing issues that arise during that review process. DMM has supported and continues to support the ISO's efforts in this initiative to do three things. The first is to clarify definitions of variable operations and maintenance costs. The second is to update the current default variable operations adder. And finally, to establish a default maintenance adder. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Emilia?
The dog has perfect timing.
Yes, apologies.
And sadly, I think I understand his question.
Great. Okay, so no questions from the board. Shall we move to public comments? Do we have any?
If you would like to make a comment, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and affiliation, and your question or comment. Currently, there are no comments in the queue.
Okay, hearing none, we are ready for a resolution. Thank you, Roger.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the tariff revisions necessary to implement the variable operations and maintenance cost review proposal items as described in the memorandum dated November 11, 2020, and move that the ISO Board authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. May I have a motion?
So moved.
That was Severin, I believe.
Yes.
And a second, please.
I'll do it, Angelina.
Okay. And Governor Bagua, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Bornstein?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
And I feel like I need a drum roll for Governor Olson's last vote on the board, which I will.
Yeah.
We'll give a little drum roll. Governor Olson, your vote, please.
Aye. Aye, aye.
Aye, sir. And I will miss you and your wit and wisdom and everything that you provide to the board. So thank you for all your years of service. I didn't get an opportunity to jump in before, but I did not want to leave without saying that. And with that, we have the motion. And back to you, Chair Galitova.
So this concludes the action items for today. We have some informational reports. Any questions on the informational reports? No, and I know we had been overly ambitious to think that we could jump into part of the executive session this afternoon if we finished early, but I think we don't have enough time to do that. We'll just adjourn and reconvene again tomorrow for executive session at 8 a.m. And Ash will try to move quickly and hopefully finish before 10:15 when you need to leave. Okay.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adjourn.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That concludes our conference. You may now disconnect. Thank you.